The momentum on the recruiting trail has carried over into the 2024 class for the Louisville Cardinals. We will discuss the program's first commitment of the recruiting cycle on this episode of the show. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome in to another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I serve as a credential media member for Cardinals Sports Zone. I also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. I want to take this time to thank you, as I always do, for making us your first listen of the day. Today is the one-year anniversary of the launch of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I will express my appreciation at the beginning of the first segment. On the docket to talk about today, Louisville 24 got its first commitment in four-star running back Isaac Brown. We will discuss what the Cardinals are getting in the highly ranked running back. We will then transition into reacting to the ACC football standings predictions of where the Cardinals are scheduled to land. And then in the final segment, we will discuss what the main questions are that I have for the Louisville football team before the beginning of the season as we head into fall camp. So let's talk a little bit about Isaac Brown, the new Cardinals commitment. Before we do that, like I mentioned, the one-year launch of the Locked On Louisville podcast is today. I remember recording that episode in a beach house in Destin, Florida, having to wait for my family to exit the house because of how sound traveled in the house, and it took me over 2 hours to record that episode. And I remember telling myself, I hope it's not as difficult as it is now. But since then, it's been a blast. I really do appreciate from the bottom of my heart how it has been received from the fan base, and how you all have shared it, listened to it, subscribed to it, rated it, streamed it all over on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, you name the streaming service. I appreciate everyone for tuning in every single time that they do. And very, very much looking forward to year two. Hopefully some more growth is in store for the show, but I couldn't do what I'm doing now if it wasn't for you all. I cannot tell you how appreciative I am of your all support and the fact that you all keep tuning in. So if you have any suggestions for me, please let me know, and I will do my best to talk about any topics that you bring up, or try to bring on any guests that you all talk about as well. So enough with my sappy thank you message. Let's get into the content of the show. Louisville 24 is officially underway. The first commitment of the 2024 class is four-star running back Isaac Brown. He is the 150th best prospect in the 24/7 Sports Composite in the 2024 class, the 7th best running back and the 31st best prospect in the state of Florida. He's a 5'9", 180-pound standout from Homestead, Florida, where he is a star for Homestead High School. A handful of offers already heading into his junior season. We're talking about offers from Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Miami, Michigan State, Mississippi, Penn State, Texas A&M, Central Florida, you name it, going down the list. Simply put, if you were looking to hear about how successful the 502 barbecue went, well, the results are speaking for themselves. The first commitment has arrived on the heels of that unofficial recruiting weekend in which Isaac Brown was on campus. So becoming the first commitment for the program in the 2024 class. This is a huge commitment for the Cardinals for a handful of reasons. I want to read to you an excerpt from Michael McCammon of Cardinal Authority, the Louisville 24/7 sports site, of what Andrew Ivins, a national recruiting analyst for 24/7 Sports, said about Isaac Brown. Brown ran one of the fastest 40s of the camp as he went in the low 4.5s on the lasers. That time isn't all surprising given his track numbers, as he recently went 10.97 in the 100-meter dash. Brown used that speed Sunday to fly past linebackers and score touchdowns via wheel routes and simply fly routes. He offers some position versatility too, as Homestead likes to utilize the class of 2020-24 prospect as a slot wide receiver in certain situations. Overall, obviously, we have to, pretty much say this when discussing any type of recruiting, especially in the 2024 class. It will be an uphill battle to hold on to Isaac Brown's commitment, because with him being ranked inside of the top 150, you would assume that every single program in the country, or a good amount of them, especially some of the big dogs, are going to continue to try to get Isaac Brown to flip his recruitment or flip his commitment, I should say. So it will be a battle up until signing day. So you have to take that into consideration, take it with a grain of salt. So nothing is set in stone, not even with the Flyville 23 guys, because they still have to sign their national letters of intent as well. So, but overall, it's a very, very solid start to the class. Isaac Brown, in my opinion, when I watch his film, I get like really heavy Deebo Samuel vibes in the way that Homestead utilized his talents. Number one, the first thing that stepped out is how lethal of a return man that he can be. I think I read somewhere that he had like 7 touchdowns from the return game, which is absolutely incredible. For sure. So you would assume that he would be a guy that maybe could come in right away and be a dynamic force on the return game. And that's something that Louisville's kind of lacked over the past couple seasons, is like a very dangerous return man. I know a lot of times it's touchbacks and things of that nature, but there's not there, in my opinion, it seems like Louisville hasn't been that dynamic in the return game. Maybe I'm just a little bit overanalyzing it, but that's kind of what I'm seeing. Number two, Homestead uses him in a way to where, it's getting him the ball in space. And I kind of come back to the comments that Scott Satterfield made all throughout last season when talking about Amari Huggins-Bruce and the way that they used Tutu Atwell in years prior as well. And that's getting these dynamic playmakers the ball in their hands with space to operate. I do apologize for my dogs going absolutely ballistic upstairs. If you can hear them. I guess they have a lot to say about Louisville football as well, as does a lot of people. But overall, I really do love the possibilities that Scott Satterfield could, draw up in terms of play calling for a guy like Isaac Brown, because he's shown time and time again that, hey, I can maximize the skill set of a player of that caliber. Smaller, faster guys that really are able to make guys miss, getting into the second level of the defense. That's kind of Isaac Brown. I wouldn't necessarily draw comparisons to Tutu per se as much as I would a guy like Deebo Samuel, just because you have the running aspect of it. Isaac Brown is listed as a running back, an all-purpose back, more specifically, according to some sites. So it'll be interesting to see what his role would be in the Louisville offense. You have to factor in the fact that assuming that Ruben Owens does indeed end up on campus, signing his letter of intent, that a lot of the carries would have to be divvied up to Ruben Owens and other running backs of that nature that they were able to bring in. But obviously, the skill set speaks for itself. I don't want to put Isaac Brown's skill set in a box and say, oh, they're going to use him as a running back. They're going to only use him as a slot receiver. The reality of the fact is they're probably going to use him in a lot of different ways. And this is where I think Scott Satterfield's play calling, people want to call it bland and things of that nature. He gets dynamic playmakers the ball in their hands. If we saw it with Tutu Atwell, we saw it at the end of the season with Amari Huggins-Bruce. We're going to see it again this year with Amari Huggins-Bruce. And Isaac Brown, I feel like more of a running back, to where you're going to see more of wheel routes, getting the ball on end arounds, wide receiver screens, things of that nature, outside zone runs, and so on and so forth. But this is a great addition to the class. To start the class, as I mentioned, seemingly every time we talk about top recruits is that top talent wants to play with other top talent. They want to go places where, sure, NIL can – you can maximize your NIL possibilities. You can go to a place where possible early playing time and things of that nature. But hey, I mean, guys want to win, and I think that with the way that Flyville 23 has kind of come about kind of materialized in terms of getting a lot of highly rated commitments, Flyville 24, if you can continue that momentum, there's no telling what could happen for recruiting moving forward for the University of Louisville, especially considering the fact that they've had multiple top 2024 guys on campus just as recently as this past weekend at the 502 barbecue. So very excited to see how the Cardinals are able to just continue the momentum as a whole. So let's take a little bit of a step back, focus a little bit more on this year's team. The ACC Football preseason standings have been released. We will discuss where the Cardinals fell into the ranks in the Atlantic Division here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at LinkedIn. As you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. It allows you to create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Did you know that every week nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So moving on into the ACC football preseason standings, Louisville has landed right in the middle of the pack of the Atlantic Division. The Cardinals at number 4, trailing Clemson, who received 111 first-place votes, NC State, who had 44, and Wake Forest, who recorded 6. It is worth noting that Florida State and Boston College, who landed at 5 and 6 respectively, earned at least one first-place vote as well. So overall, I think that this is an instance to where, this was the overall notion from Fan Nation. Getting quarterback Malik Cunningham back on the field in 2022 is a major positive for the Cardinals. He was a 62% passer a year ago, throwing for over 2,500 yards and 18 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions, while also rushing for over 1,000 yards and 20 additional touchdowns, both top 10 numbers nationally. I think that this is probably right on par with where a lot of people have Louisville. I would venture out and say that anywhere from, realistically 3 to 6 is where a lot of people will have. Sorry, dog. My puppy dog is running around rampant, has a case of the zoomies. But we are going to disregard that. Only going on when I want to record. But overall, like I mentioned, on a serious note, anywhere from 3 to 6, I feel like is kind of the general consensus of where people find Louisville in their respective ACC preseason standings. Clemson, in my opinion, is going to be battling with NC State 1 and 2. I get the hype behind Wake Forest. I really do. But this is a Louisville team that contended with the Demon Deacons last season, lost by just a single possession. And really, it's not any disrespect to Wake Forest. I think that they're going to be solid. I think that a top 4 finish is probably about 75% guaranteed. And that's assuming that they stay healthy and everything like that. But overall, I'm a little bit higher on the Cardinals than most. I think that when you look at Louisville's last year and you see that 6-7 record, right? A lot of times, statistics and things of that nature never truly tell the full story. And I think that one of the reasons why I'm higher on this Louisville team than a lot of other people, especially maybe in the national media or those that maybe don't necessarily follow Louisville as much as I do, is the fact that, I was at the majority of the games last year. I was at every single home game. A lot of those home games, they had leads going into the fourth quarter, and even on some of those road trips, Wake Forest, NC State, two teams that are, all three teams that are projected at the top three, Clemson, NC State, and Wake Forest, the Cardinals had fourth quarter leads against. So, and obviously those teams return a lot of pieces, but so do the Cardinals. They return a good amount of starters. Malik Cunningham is back. They have their running back committee back. They return a very veteran-led offensive line. Sure, they have some newcomers at receivers, but they have one of the best tight ends in the country in Marshawn Ford. Defensively speaking, Yaya Diaby, Ashton Gelati, they are back. You insert Jermaine Lole into the mix, into the interior defensive line. Yasir Abdullah. Monty Montgomery was out for almost all but 2 games last year. He's back, the leader of the defense. Sure, you do lose C.J. Avery, but you bring in a guy like Momo Sanogo. Kei'Trel, Clark, Chandler Jones are back. Quincy Riley, Jarvis Brownlee Jr. Some of these other guys are into the mix at cornerback. Kendrick Duncan Jr. announces he's coming back. You have a transfer in MJ Griffin at safety. Josh Minkins is healthy. So what I'm trying to say is that Louisville is no short of returning talent either. So as much as we want to talk about those other 3 teams being at the top 3 because of the returning talent, and for good reason, they should be. I agree. I think that my top 3 looks just like that in that order. But I will say that Louisville at 4, I think it's very, very close between 3 and 4 for me. And I guess the dissonance from the rest of the country is that I think that I think that Louisville's going to get better on both sides of the ball. I think that defensively some questions are on that side of the ball, but I do think that Scott Satterfield's going to make some adjustments. In terms of the teams behind the Cardinals, this is interesting as well. I think that Syracuse, I feel pretty comfortable putting them in that 7 spot, right? But Florida State and Boston College, it's so difficult to really depict what both of those teams are going to do respectively, just because, it could go either way. Florida State, it seems like they have the talent to be very, very good, but Mike Norvell really hasn't done all that well in Tallahassee. He's 8-13 in 2 seasons. This is pretty much maybe a year on the hot seat. Jordan Travis is back for another season. He looked very, very good at the end of last year. They were 4-1 in the last 5 contests. So you have some of that momentum heading into 2022. And then you have a Boston College team with a healthy Phil Jurkovec that looked like a completely different team in the first 2 weeks before he got hurt. He's going to be fully healthy in 2022. Zay Flowers is back. He caused a lot of fits for the Cardinals. But are they going to be able to kind of pick some of that pace up on defense? They bring back a good amount of defensive starters from a good defense from last year, despite the Cardinals putting up a pretty solid offensive performance against the Boston College Eagles. They do return a lot of starters on that side of the ball. So Florida State and Boston College are 2 teams that I don't necessarily think that they have the caliber of potential that Louisville has, to where Louisville could possibly sneak into that top 3. But I do think that a couple results here and there in Florida State and Boston College could be making some big time upsets. So really you have kind of your top tier of Clemson and NC State, in my opinion. That's 1A and 1B. Wake Forest is sitting right at number 2 in that second tier, and number 2. But right after Wake Forest, you have kind of a smaller sub tier where Louisville, Florida State, and Boston College kind of make up the 3A, 3B, 3C, and then you have Syracuse at number 4. So ultimately, I think that this is, a good year for Louisville to really prove themselves. And it's a year that some results are going to have to happen, because you have a lot of guys returning from last season. The past 2 years, it's about, okay, well, we're right there in terms of winning games. Well, you can't have the mental victories anymore, the moral victories. It's about getting wins, getting the results. So year 4 is a big year for Scott Satterfield and the coaching staff. The coaches know that, the players know that, the fans know that. We will see how that transpires onto the field. So with the final segment of the show, we're going to identify my biggest question questions for the season and for the team coming up ahead of fall camp, with Media Day happening today on Tuesday. I feel like it's a good time to talk about some of these questions. We will discuss those here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at Built Bar. Look, if you haven't tried the puffs by now from Built Bar, you're depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. Are you ready? It's delicious. It is cookie dough covered in chocolate. That is right. Built has done it again. Let me introduce to you your new favorite. Cookie dough chunk puffs have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course they're covered in 100% real chocolate. All of Built Bar's products are covered in 100% real chocolate, and there really is no limit to what they may do in terms of flavors. If it tastes good, they will make it work and make it healthy afterwards. You can go to built.com and check out their macros chart and scroll down and see all of the healthy benefits of why Built Bar tastes like a candy bar but is as healthy as a protein bar. Once again, that's built.com using the promo code LOCKED15, and you can get 15% off your order. Once again, using the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Heading right along into the final segment of the show, the questions that I have for this Louisville football team ahead of the season, before fall camp starts, what I'm hoping to see get maybe not necessarily answered outright, because we might not necessarily see that until the season starts or even a couple weeks into the season. But there's a couple things that I'm wondering, the biggest questions for me. Number one, and I think that this is probably number one for a lot of fans out there, is how is Brian Brown and company, or how are Brian Brown and company going to make adjustments in 2022? It seemed like last season, the defense, the talent is on the defense. It's just a matter of kind of tweaking the formations and things of that nature. It seemed like, it got better toward the end of the season. The Cardinals took a big step forward in terms of run defense. They look very solid in that category, shutting down Sean Tucker and the Syracuse offense, looking good against Mateo Durant against Duke. But ultimately, the passing defense was one of the big questions, getting after the quarterback. How's Brian Brown, and more importantly, I guess you could say, is what is the role of Wesley McGriff going to be in this defense, and how is that going to translate to what we're seeing on the field? I know that Court Dennison and Brian Brown had a very solid relationship in terms of what each's responsibilities were and things of that nature. So I'm interested to see some of the adjustments and some of the new things that Brian Brown and company try ahead of 2022, because the talent is there on the defense. Obviously, it's just a matter of getting those results. So I think that's the number one question for me. Number two, it's a big position battle. The running back position is my big question, considering how are you going to get every one of those guys carries, and who rises to the occasion, who separates themselves. Because last year, you had Jalen Mitchell, you had Travion Cooley, and then you had Hassan Hall, and Jawar Jordan had just got there. Maurice Berkeley also got some carries. This year, it's a little bit different. Jalen Mitchell, he's a year older, and he had a very solid year last year. Travion Cooley is a year older. He had a very solid year last year. So you have two guys that are better than they were last year. And you also have a very dynamic guy on Tyon Evans, who is an upgrade in the running backs room. And then Jawar Jordan has a full season of being able to study the playbook and maybe not necessarily being a late addition to the program. So those four guys, it's going to be interesting to see how Scott Satterfield and Lance Taylor are going to be able to split the carries between these guys, and who they decide to go with right out of the gate. I would assume that's probably going to be Jalen Mitchell, but at this point you don't know. The initial depth chart literally had Jalen Mitchell or Travion Cooley or Tyon Evans or Jawar Jordan. So obviously the Cardinals not tipping their hands just yet in terms of what they are going to be possibly going with in the running backs room. But I'm very, very interested to see how you're going to get all of those guys carries and what packages you're going to use those guys in. Is it going to be based upon matchups? Are you going to ride the hot hand like you did the last season? What's the it's a good problem to have, but at the end of the day, it is something that still has to be worked out. And that ahead of fall camp, I'm interested to see who is able to kind of rise to the occasion, who is going to solidify themselves or even maybe separate themselves from the rest of the group. So overall, like I said, I think that the main two questions for me, it's the defensive formations. Are we going to see more of it? I know that there's talks about a possible 4-3 base that we're going to see. Are we going to see a flip-flop, multiple packages to where you're going to see a 4-3, a 3-4? Do you look at a 4-2-5 in certain circumstances? Certain circumstances. Can't speak today. But what does that look like? Running back wise, who steps out there, right? Who is going to rise to the occasion? I think that the last question for me, and this isn't necessarily one as big as the other one, in my opinion. How is how are you? I guess the way I would phrase this question is, how are certain defensive backs going to be used? Are they going to be used as more of their traditional position? I know that versatility is something that Brian Brown and company really value. Guys like Chandler Jones, are we going to see him more of a safety role, maybe an outside linebacker position where he's playing in the slot? Or do you see him more on the outside? Guys like Nicario Harper. Are we going to see Nicario Harper as more of like in the dog position or card position, whichever one is for the defensive back in that outside linebacker group? Are we going to see him in that role? Do we see him more of as a safety? Excuse me. Sorry about that. And the same goes for a couple guys that kind of fit that mold as well. Are we going to see Derek Edwards more as a safety, or are we going to see him more as a cornerback? So I'm interested to see where some of these defensive backs that are listed at one position that have played other positions, are we going to see kind of going back and forth based upon packages? Do they make more of a switch heading into fall camp? Sort of things of that nature. So those are the big questions. We're obviously going to continue to talk about football all throughout this month as we lead up to the season. Thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen every day. Thanks again for all the support over the past year and making this 1 year anniversary of the podcast's launch last August so special to me. I can't tell you how appreciative I am of each and every one of you, but that's going to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We will see you right back here